Hello students, um, welcome. I hope everyone is healthy and safe, and I appreciate these are very difficult times and this is a bit unusual. It is much easier to do this in the classroom, but unfortunately that is not possible in the current circumstances. So I hope these PowerPoint presentations are useful, and I hope that they will be of some benefit to you while we are trying to do the best we can in this current situation. So these PowerPoint presentations will cover the different aspects that are involved in the bilingual program for grade 12 this year. So we will cover poetry with a few of the poems that are given to us from the ministry, and we will also look at unseen poems. We will cover the novel, and we will also cover the two types of writing that are asked of us this semester. So as we know, the exam this semester, it's slightly changed. Our literature and our writing are different sections. So what I would like to start with is just a quick overview of the poetry section. So how will we go about doing this? So we have a few poems that we will study, and these will be what are called scene poems. So what's a scene poem? A scene poem is one that you will receive from the teacher, i.e. me, and we will study it, we will analyze it, and we will look at the different aspects of poetry that every time you analyze a poem, this is what you should look out for. So what is the goal of all this? Why are we doing poetry? Well, the goal is to give you a skill set that will allow you to analyze a poem with the teacher in class. As a result of this, you will actually have a skill set that will allow you to analyze an unseen poem by yourself. Now, obviously, unseen poetry is what is going to be asked in the exam. So an unseen poem is obviously when you go into the exam, this poem you will see it for the first time. So you need to have the skills to be able to analyze that poem to the best of your ability. Okay? Now, students are often apprehensive about poetry. They think lots think of Shakespeare and things like that when they think of poetry. But it's actually quite an enjoyable experience because there are so many possibilities of what something could mean, and so it's actually quite an enjoyable experience. And as long as we know what areas we should analyze, then we should be able to analyze any poem that comes up in front of us. So in this lesson, that is what I'm going to look at. I'm going to look at the key areas of poetry that students should look at, and if you can look at these in an educated and logical and reasonable way, then hopefully you will be able to answer any type of question that you will receive in the exam, because you will have the tools to do so. Okay? I hope all of that was clear. So let's go to the first slide. So this first slide, as you can see, just has the title Poetry, and you can see that I have 5 bullet points. These are the 5 things I concentrate on all the time, no matter what poem we are studying. So as you can see, the first bullet point is structure. Then we have language. Now, language is vocabulary and all of that, but it's also figurative language. So I will look at both of those things in this presentation. Next, we have the theme, followed by the tone, and finally, the mood. Now, if you know what all of these things mean, and if you can analyze them effectively, then no matter what question you get in the exam, you will be able to write a very educated and analytical answer and hopefully get good marks. Okay, so I wish you all the best, and we will now move on to the first of these bullet points, which will be structure. So let's have a look. What exactly is structure? Well, if we just look at the word itself and we just want to define it, the structure is generally defined as the different parts of an overall subject. So for example, a building has a structure. All the different parts that make up a building is its structure. And it's no different with poetry. Now, students are a lot more familiar with structure than they often realize. We see it every day all around us. We see it in class every day. For example, when you send a text message or a message on WhatsApp, generally it would follow a type of structure. Text messages are often short. Sometimes they use slang and they're straight to the point. Okay, that, even though we don't even realize it, that is a structure. When we write a letter, we have the address is in certain places, we have the greeting in a certain place, we have our paragraphs organized, and we sign off at the end. That is also a structure. The same with emails. Emails, you have a greeting, you have your paragraphs, the type of language you use. This is the structure of an email. I suppose where you would be most familiar with structure would be in your essays that you did at school in semester 1. These essays would have had a very definite structure. Let's take an argumentative essay, for example, or an opinion essay. You will definitely have a structure to that. You will have an introduction, you will have your body paragraphs, and you will have your conclusion. So structure is all around us, and it's vitally important, and it is even more so in poetry. So as we can see from the slide, structure is how the poem is organized. Okay? Now, why do we need to look at this? Well, poems don't happen by accident. Poems are usually very, very well thought out, and this organization of the poem, or this structure of the poem, was carefully chosen by the poet, and it was done this way for a reason. Generally, poems don't waste any words. Therefore, everything that is in there is organized that way for a reason. Okay? Now, so think back to your essay. Without structure or a plan, then the essay is generally unsuccessful. Okay? And so the structure of a poem is just how it's organized, and it's basically putting the poet's plan into work. Okay? So, structure is how the poem is organized. Now, how is a poem generally organized? So, when you see lines together like they are in a paragraph, this is generally called a stanza. Sometimes it can be called a verse, but it's called a stanza. So this is a group of lines like a paragraph in a poem. Okay? And each stanza then will be broken into lines. Now, be very aware that a line is not a sentence. Okay? For example, a stanza might have 8 lines, but 1 sentence. So, when we analyze the poem, we will look at it line by line. Okay? Now remember, everything is put in its place for a reason in a poem. Okay? So everything must be looked at. Nothing is by accident. So what is on each line? What punctuation is used? Is there any capitalization used? All of these things we must look at when we look at the structure of a poem. Okay? So the structure is basically just the organization of the poem. How many stanzas are there, how many lines are there, things like that. Okay, so that's what we mean by the structure of a poem, and we will look at that more carefully when we go into our first scene poem, where we just have an understanding of what structure means. Basically, it's how the poem is organized. How does it look on the paper? And remember, nothing is by accident. Everything is written that way for a reason. Okay? Right, the next thing I want to talk about is and this is slide number 3, is the language of a poem. So as you can see from the slide, language can basically be summarized as the words and how they are used, all the vocabulary in the poem. So how does a poet use language to create meaning? Okay, remember, poetry does not happen by accident. Every single word that is chosen in the poem has been chosen for a purpose. Okay, now when we look at the language in the poem, we should look at the descriptive language in a lot of cases. Adjectives, verbs, adverbs, these type of things. Okay, now we also need to look at connotations. Now, just in case anyone doesn't know what a connotation is, a connotation is when you have an idea, there's a certain idea associated to a word, whether that idea is positive or negative. Okay, for example, if you heard the word hero, just on its own, that word hero, what would automatically come to mind? It would be a very positive image. We'd think of superheroes, we'd think of people who save other people, like police officers or firemen or things like that. So that has a positive connotation attached to it. Just the word on its own, hero, would be associated with positive things. On the other side, if you saw the word thief or criminal, just by itself, those words, then you would automatically think negative things, because they are associated with negative things, crime. So if a word is used and it has a connotation of some sort, whether it be positive or negative, it has been used by the poet for a reason. Okay, so every vocab word in the poem needs to be looked at, because none of it is there by accident. It's all there for a reason. Now, students often say to me, "Mister, what happens if I don't understand a word in the poem?" Now, this is unlikely, but it is possible. It could happen that you don't understand a word in, say, line number 6, for example. Now, what do you do in this case? Right. I would recommend that you don't comment on any vocab or language that you're not 100% sure you know the meaning of. But however, sometimes something will appear in a line and it's vital and you know there's a good point there, but you're not 100% sure on what the meaning of a vocab word is. So you're not 100% clear on that language in that sentence or in that line. So what do? Your best option is your context reading. Now, what is context reading? Basically, if you can understand everything that is around that word you do not understand, then you can make an educated guess. You can make an assumption about what that word means. It mightn't be exactly right, but because of the context in it, generally, poets won't change massively their meaning during a stanza. It can happen, but generally a stanza will be with the same theme, the same message, the same mood, same tone, is generally in this. They won't change it mid-sentence or mid-line. So if there's a word there and you understand everything else the poet is saying, then use your context reading. Look what's around that word. is, can you make an educated guess as to what that word means? And if you're confident that you think, yeah, it's about this or about that, then you can make a point of it. Okay? Now, this is just language in general I'm talking about here. In the next slide, you will see that I'm going to move on to the figurative language, which is all our figurative language techniques. Okay? So remember, nothing in a poem is there by accident. Every word has been chosen carefully, so give due consideration to all the words that are there. Slide 4, figurative language. Now, as you can see, I have only got 4 bullet points for figurative language. Does that mean there are only 4 types of figurative language? Of course not. There are 25, 30, 35, 40 different things you could concentrate on when you talk about figurative language. However, what I am going to concentrate on here are the four major types of figurative language that you come across in poetry. Okay? Does this mean this is all of them? Of course not. However, it wouldn't work this way trying to explain too many, it'd just be confusing. So I'm concentrating on the 4 that are most common in poems. Okay? So, as you can see, I have 4 bullet points. I have simile, metaphor, personification, and hyperbole. Now, so let's look at each one individually and see what they are. So, what is a simile? A simile is when you are comparing 2 things, whatever they may be, using generally the words like or as. So you're saying something is like something else, or something is acting as something else. Okay? So an example of a simile would be, the movie was like watching paint dry. Okay? The movie was like watching paint dry. Now, what would be the goal of that for the poet to use that expression? So, watching paint dry is a very boring process. So he's explaining how boring the movie was by comparing it to an absolutely repetitive, boring task. Okay, so that is what a simile is. It is when you compare 2 things to each other for an effect, to make the meaning clear. Okay. Now, the next one is metaphor. Now, metaphor is very similar to simile. Okay, there's not a huge difference between them. The key difference is you are comparing 2 things using like or as when you do a simile, but with a metaphor, you are actually saying that something is something else. Okay. A very common example would be if you ever watch sports, or you watch like a football game or a basketball game, and they're talking about a player and they say, he was a rock in the defense. He was a rock in the defense. Was he actually a rock? No, they said he was a rock. Now, why would they do that? Because a rock is hard, it's strong, it is hard to move. So they're comparing the defender to a rock by saying he was a rock. That is the simplified version of what a metaphor is. You say something is something else to infer meaning upon that thing. Okay? Another example, like you see on the slide, her hair was a flowing golden river. Okay? Was her hair actually a golden flowing river? Of course not. The reason that it is used, it would create meaning. We know the color of her hair, flowing river. Obviously her hair was wavy, and so they're comparing her hair to like the movement of the water as it flows down. Okay, so that's what a metaphor is. It is when you say something is something else to create a comparison that is clear in the reader's mind. Okay? The next bullet point is personification. Right. For this, all you need to remember is concentrate on the first 6 letters of that word. Person. Okay? When we give the qualities of a person to anything that's not a person, that is personification. Okay? Why do poets do it? Poets do it because we are people and we know what certain things mean regarding us. So when poets use words regarding people and place them on inanimate objects, they're taking something that we know what it means and they're putting on something that is not human. Okay, so for personification, you only need to remember look at those first. Person. If it is a quality of a person given to something that is not a person, then that is personification. As you can see from the example I have written on the slide, the wind whispered through the trees. Now, does the wind whisper? No, it does not. Then why use the word? Because we all know what whispering means regarding people. It means when you talk quietly and it's not very loud or anything like that. So why would the poet use whispered for the wind? Because it shows how the wind was not threatening, was not loud, was not creating any fear. It was quiet, it was subtle. Okay? So that word would infer the meaning that the poet was looking for. And so whispered is a word that refers to as something that people do. So by giving it to the wind, to describe the wind, that is personification. Okay? Now the last bullet point I have here is hyperbole. Now, hyperbole very basically is just huge exaggeration. Okay? If anything is exaggerated a lot, then it's referred to as hyperbole. Now, so my students always ask, how do you mean exaggerated? I mean massively exaggerated. Generally, hyperbole is not possible. Okay? It's something that cannot be achieved. A very simple example would be, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Okay? That's a very funny, simple example, but it makes it clear. You could not eat a horse. A horse is too big. You would never be able to eat all a horse. Okay? So, it is something that could not be achieved. Now, why do they use it? Poets use it to exaggerate the emotion that is going on at the time. So if you look at the example here, I have written, I have been waiting here forever. Now, have I been waiting here forever? Of course not. Nobody can wait forever because we're all mortal. So why was the word forever chosen? It was chosen to exaggerate how frustrated this person is because they've been waiting for a long time. They have not been waiting forever. It is huge exaggeration, and that is basically what hyperbole is. Okay, slide number 5. As you can see, the title of this slide is theme, and as you can see from the bullet points, what do they mean by theme? It's what message is the poem trying to deliver, or the poet trying to deliver. That is the theme of the poem. Now, a problem that some of my students have is sometimes they confuse the theme with the subject or the topic of the poem. Okay? Now, these things are not the same. Okay? The subject or the topic of the poem is literally the elements in the poem. Okay? For example, it could be about, say, something in nature. Okay? And you could be talking about a storm. So, say the poem is about a storm. Okay? That's the subject of the poem. It is not the theme. The storm is being used to deliver a greater message overall. Okay? So, even though the subject in the poem is a storm, the message is not about the storm. For example, the message could be about some problem that is occurring in the world, or some problem that the poet is having personally. It's not actually a storm. He's using this storm as a metaphor. He's alluding to something else. Now, allusion is when you talk about one thing, but you're actually making a greater meaning about something else. So, the subject of the storm could be that, for example, it could be talking about war, as an example. Okay? So the theme is about the problems associated with war. The subject or topic of the poem is the storm, but that is not the theme. The theme is the overall greater issue that the poet is trying to address. Okay? So just don't get those two things mixed up, because it's not the same thing. The subject or the topic is what is used in the poem, the actual words used, but the theme is the greater overall issue or message that the poem is trying to deliver. Okay? What is it trying to tell you about life? What is it trying to tell you about the world? What is it trying to tell you about the emotions? What is it trying to tell you about whatever issue is going on that the poet is using a storm to represent? Okay? So that is the key when you think of theme. What message is the poet and the poem trying to deliver to us, the reader? Okay? Not the subject or topic actually used in the poem. What is the message that they are trying to deliver overall? Okay? So just be aware of that. Subject and topic actually used in the poem is not the theme. So for example, we'll use the storm example again. If the poet is talking about a storm in the poem, the theme is not, oh, how bad the storm was. The storm represents something greater. It represents something more. It can, whatever that may be, depending on the poem. So when we look at poems, we have to realize that what is actually being said, in many cases, represents something greater, a greater message or a greater idea. Okay? So it's very, very important that we do not mix those up. Okay? Slide number 6. So as you can see, the title of slide number 6 is tone. Now, we all know this very well already. My best piece of advice that I can give to you is think of when someone is talking. Okay? We know by listening to someone what emotion they're trying to show. Okay? Let's take a very simple example. You know, you're in your living room one day and your mother or father or guardian, they call you into the kitchen. You know by the tone of their voice, are they happy with you? Are they upset with you? Are they angry with you? And so the tone is something we're all very familiar with. But we just have to first associate with when we hear people talk. The tone of their voice tells us the emotion that is attached to their words. Okay? So we're all familiar with this. So it's not that different in poetry. The words chosen have specific meanings or connotations attached to them, and we have to be able to identify the tone based on the words used. Now it's harder when it's written down. It's easier when someone says it, because we can, by how loud someone speaks or by how they say something, gives us a clear indication of tone. But we have to be more perceptive in poetry because it's written down. We don't have someone reading it out. But that's the best piece of advice I could give to students. Imagine if this poem was being said aloud. Imagine someone standing in front of a room. Imagine the poet is standing in front of your class and they are reading this poem out loud. What tone of voice would he or she use in order to say the poem? Okay? If you can identify this, you will know the emotion that is attached to the poem. Okay? So the tone is what is the author's attitude to the subject matter. For example, are they praising something? Are they being sarcastic about something? Are they showing their anger or disgust for something? Are they showing their fear about something? Okay? But you have to imagine the poet literally standing in front of the class reading this poem. How would it be read? This is vital, because if we know this, then we know the tone of the poem. Okay? Now, with tone, the tone displays the attitude of the poet. What we need to be aware of is this is hugely biased, because this tone is from the poet's point of view. Okay? So the tone will represent the poet's point of view. It might not necessarily be your point of view. However, it does give us an insight into what type of person the poet is and what type of poem this is. Okay? So just realize tone is very important, but it is from a specific person's point of view. It doesn't have to be your point of view, but we have to be able to identify the poet's point of view. Okay? So just remember that it is very valuable information to know the tone, but the tone is from a specific... Now, what can influence tone? Everything can influence tone. Your race, your religion, your gender, all of these things can influence your tone, because you are judging something and talking about something from a particular situation. Okay? So that is what is key with tone. It gives a great insight into the poem and the poet, but it is from their point of view. Therefore, it is biased. But as long as you recognize that, then you won't have any problem analyzing it. Slide number 7. The title is mood. So what does the mood mean? Now, tone and mood are often mixed up. Okay? As I said in the last slide, tone is what is the author's attitude to the subject matter. What is their attitude towards what they are talking about? Okay? Mood is slightly different. Mood is what emotions do we feel as readers of the poem. Now, the tone should create the mood. Okay? So if the poet is successful in what they are trying to achieve, they will show their attitude to us, and then that will dictate our mood. Okay? If the poet is successful, we should share the same tone as the mood. Okay? So however, we might have a different opinion, therefore it doesn't always happen like this. But the tone of the author is trying to create a mood in us. So, if the author is successful, if the poet is successful, then the words and phrases and figurative language and structure and theme that the author is discussing should create the desired mood in us. What emotion are we feeling? Okay? So, if the tone is an angry tone, then it should create anger in us if the poet is successful in what he or she is trying to achieve. Okay? So just don't mix those two up. The tone is the attitude of the poet. The mood is how we feel as a reader. But the poet has a goal of creating a certain mood in us, the reader. Okay? So it's just very important that we don't mix those two up. Okay, slide number 8. In slide number 8, I've just attached a poem. It's called Operating Room by John Reid. And afterwards, I have numerous questions based on all the slides that we have done so far. Okay? So what I would like students now to try, take as long as you like, up to 30 minutes. I'd like you to try and answer these questions to the best of your ability based on what we have learned. Please complete this task before you go to the next slide, as on the next slide I will have the answers for each of these. Okay? So best of luck. Don't worry if you get any wrong, because this is just a practice to see if we understand what I have said so far. Okay, so there are 8 questions. Try your best to analyze them as best you can. The answers do not have to be that long, just short answers, just to check your understanding of what we've done so far. Okay, best of luck.